Welcome back to Black Renaissance. Please welcome Reverend MacArthur Flournoy, the Director for Faith Partnerships and Mobilization at the Human Rights Campaign. And it's a pleasure to have you back on here. We've spoken before.
We have.
But we come together in the wake of the Orlando tragedy.
Yes.
And clearly this is an issue that the Human Rights Campaign has taken on and is addressing right now.
Yes.
You actually sent me a statement that's going to be coming out very soon from Human Rights Campaign about the Orlando tragedy. So first of all, talk to me about why it was important to make that statement now.
It's vitally important that clergy, that people of faith acknowledge the fact that 102 lives were affected, 49 lives were taken. It's also important to understand that all of those essentially are people of color. 9 African American, the balance were people of Latin descent from various countries. This was one of the most heinous acts in the recorded history of our country, where a gunman went into a place and annihilated 49 people. It's also important to acknowledge that there are faith leaders across this country from multiple faith traditions. The Religion Council from the Human Rights Campaign, comprised of 17 different members of clergy from various faith traditions, came together and said, not only is this not acceptable, but we view this as an act of bigotry, of hatred, and it's antithetical to everything we believe about faith.
And you are making a very powerful statement about it, and one that's very needed right now. I'll just read a bit from that statement coming out shortly. You wrote, "To our amazement, in subsequent days, we heard the clamor of hate rhetoric expressed by some who call themselves faith leaders and civic officials. Their lament is that more lives were not claimed." And you say, "We unequivocally and vehemently reject such vitriolic dogma." We have heard some hatred in the aftermath of this. It is shocking that it would come from clergy.
It is shocking that it comes from clergy, and it's also important to understand that there are people that are in the pews that have made statements to the effect that while we grieve the loss of life, it's almost as if there's a double standard, that our grief only goes so far because those persons are LGBTQ. And we're saying that that too is unacceptable. That is a covert sign of discrimination. That's a covert sign of bigotry. And we really need to take a look as multiple faith institutions and ask ourselves, do we believe in justice under the law for all? Do we believe love for all? It's interesting to note that these days that we are mourning, grieving the anniversary of the crime that took place in the AME Church, where lives were claimed, 9 lives were claimed. And as I see it, it's the same source, and that being hatred and bigotry. And so we're looking at coming together as people of faith, members of the LGBT community, our straight allies, justice proponents, and saying this is not acceptable. This is a time to stand together, and we're seeing evidence of that.
Do you think there is a failure amongst some churches to draw that parallel? We certainly saw a lot of churches reacting after the South Carolina shooting. Are you seeing some apathy or a lack of that sort of strong reaction in the aftermath of Orlando?
You know, I have the advantage of working with a good many people that are supportive of LGBT equality. But the truth of the matter is that we are simply not there in many communities when it comes to faith institutions, not only churches, but certainly mosques, some temples. But I have the great advantage of working with colleagues such as Rabbi Denise Egger, who is the president of the Central Atlantic Reformation movement amongst Judaism, who stand in ardent support against such bigotry. And there is homophobia espoused from pulpits, and it's rampant. And I just even want to take it a step further. There are many LGBT persons that sit in churches and places of worship where there is this vitriol espoused, and they choose to worship there. And I don't want to vilify them, but I do want to ask the question, at what point do we recognize that we are being spiritually violated? It almost reminds me of Juneteenth, you know, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. There were some that chose to stay on the plantation, even in spite of the fact that they were liberated. Now, I'm not saying that it was easy. This is complex. But I think we're at a place in the movement of justice and equality where we have to decide at what point are we going to stand together on the side of justice and love and say this is not acceptable.
Powerful, powerful words, and certainly a phenomenon that truly does exist in the church. I mean, we definitely see examples of LGBT people existing in churches that do not accept them, and they wind up hiding who they are.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So is it HRC's responsibility, specifically speaking of the faith branch? I mean, what is your job to kind of stand in that gap in the wake of a tragedy like this?
I have the gift of working with a breadth of faith leaders across faith traditions who are mobilizing themselves to look at issues of public policy, to look at issues of non-discrimination. You know, folks call it a bathroom bill, but imagine deciding who has access to a bathroom and who doesn't. We know that within the context of the African American experience that there was a time that certain people were denied the right to use the bathroom. And it's really not about a bathroom. It's about discrimination. And who decides who has access to that? So our work is really around looking at justice and looking at, you know, broader issues. Today, our president, Chad Griffin, made a public statement that looks at gun violence, which is vitally important, that we call to attention that do we really need assault rifles accessible to people who have been placed on a no-fly list? That's a complex issue, but we see elected officials taking this up, you know, of late. And I think it's something that calls us together. And when I say us, I don't mean just the LGBT community. I mean justice-seeking people, the lives of our children. Absolutely. As the father of 5, the lives of our families, our communities are at stake. What's going to be the next place of worship that is violated? The next club. And I think it's important that we understand the risk that we're in, so there's no place for bigotry or violence.
Absolutely. Your voice so needed on this issue, and HRC's stand also needed very much. Thank you so much for joining us again. A pleasure.
It's been an honor to be here.
All right. For more information about the Human Rights Campaign, log on to hrc.org. That's hrc.org. We'll be back with more Black Renaissance.